Major scales. Everyone hates to practice them, but the fact is they are the building blocks of music as we know it. A scale is simply a group of notes that's arranged in a certain pattern, and today we want to talk specifically about major scales. Major scales, the pattern can be found by looking at the white keys on a piano starting on C. Let's do that right now. If we go from C to D, we see that there's a whole step. From D to E is a whole step. And from E to F is a half step. Because remember, on the piano keyboard, there's no black key between E and F. Continuing on, between F and G, there's a whole step. Between G and A is a whole step. A and B, whole step. And again, between B and C, there's no black key. So it's also a half step. It's this pattern of whole steps and half steps that gives us that sound that we're all very familiar with. We've heard it hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. And using this pattern, we can find any major scale starting on any note that we want to. Unfortunately, they're not all quite as easy as the C major scale. Let's start on the key of G, for instance. If we go to G to A, we have a whole step. If we go from A to B, we have a whole step. And from B to C is a half step. So far, so good. Whole, whole, half. Here we also have whole, whole, half. Between C and D is a whole step. Between D and E is a whole step. And between E and F is a half step. The pattern we want is whole, whole, half, hold, hold, whole, half. And what we now have is hold, hold, half, hold, hold, half. Let's see how this sounds. Something sounds a little odd, right? I'm not saying it sounds bad, but it doesn't sound like a major scale. How do we remedy this? To get the whole step, we simply raise F up to F sharp. Then, from E to F sharp, we now have a whole step, and everything works out perfectly because from F sharp to G, we now have a half step. Hold, whole, half, hold, hold, whole, half. And now, just by altering that one note, we now have that ever so familiar major scale. And that sounds like a major scale. Some scales use sharps. Some scales also use flats. Let's start on the note F. From F to G, we have a whole step. From G to A is a whole step. And from A to B is also a whole step. The pattern we want, again, is whole, whole, half. And what we have now is whole, whole, whole. Let's see how this one sounds. Again, I'm not saying it sounds bad, but it doesn't sound like a major scale. How do we remedy this? This time, we lower B down to B flat. And now from A to B flat, we have a half step. Everything works out fine because from B flat to C, we have a whole step. C to D is a whole step. D to E is a whole step. And then E to F is a half step. And our favorite pattern, hold, whole, half, hold, hold, whole, half, is now there. Just to make sure we're right, let's hear how it sounds. Sounds like a major scale to me. One thing you want to keep in mind while building major scales, a couple things actually. You want to use every note at least once before it repeats. Okay? The reason I say that is because you want to have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. We know that enharmonically F sharp could also be G flat, but you don't want to repeat the notes. So in other words, you don't want to have E, G flat, G, because that would be skipping over F. You have to use each letter once. You also don't want to mix the sharps and flats in the same scale, same major scale. And that's very important also. That'll help keep everything in order. Okay? So do some practice with this, and then I'll see you with the next lesson in just a moment.